The warrior of yore witnessed us on the shore, alone in the darkest day. The girl with no loom of hair, drowned in despair, she's here with us to stay. After all, not sad, all spent, where our desire is got without content. Now that I pissed off everyone who has studied even minimally about poetry, welcome back to the Silver Screen Conference, everyone, for a special spooky Halloween episode. As your host, for appropriately horror host, it's me, the were-rat Theo Scaven. Joining me today are the Jersey Devil, Jova,
Pleased to meet ya.
the Manhattan Mothman, Digimon,
Actually, I think Carol Halliday is perfect and doesn't need fixing at all.
and lastly, the Ben Shiroi.
Eggs are great.
Lovely.
You know, I gotta say, it's quite character development that you're a banshee instead of a werecat this year, Shiroi.
Well, to be fair, Celtic stuff, and pun, and
Yes.
irresistible pun. I know that she would have made it before me.
Oh
Anyway,
yes, this year is our Halloween Pokemon podcast, and what better to scare Pokemon fans than with something that makes them have to think deep?
well, also it's very appropriate
you're not
because
wrong.
what's one of the most crucial part for any Pokemon trainer? Going to the daycare and making, their beloved Skitty having doing the no pants dance with a Wailord to produce something that is called an egg. And what better way to celebrate that than with a story about an egg? Jova, please tell our audience what today's specimen is in English.
Angel's Egg.
Which, for its Japanese title, which is the same thing, it's called Tenshi no Tamago. So, this is a proper anime movie from 1985, directed by Mamoru Oshii, a person who you might know, which did work before this on some Urusei Yatsura OVAs, which Jova probably knows about, specifically Only You and Beautiful Dreamer. After this,
Comedy films, so of course he went from that to this, which was
Well-
originally supposed to be a Lupin the
Lupin the
Third.
Third. Well, to be fair, even Jova, so I don't know how much you saw those. The early Lupin the Third OVA tends to be fucking weird, specifically something like Mystery of Mammon. But anyway, after this, he went back to, being a bit more restrained with stuff like the pet labor movies. But then he did the 1995 version of Ghost in the Shell, which, while not being a, completely accurate adaptation, mostly about the personality of the Major, Motoko Kusanagi, it was incredibly beloved and inspired something like The Matrix. On the side project, it also created the franchise of Jinro, I think it's called. Basically, if you ever saw totalitarian soldiers in power armor and red lenses, shooting someone, it's probably out of that. Killzone also took inspiration from that. But we're not here for any of that. We're here for the movie did in 1985. A story which is simple and complicated at the same time, to the point where our usual analysis is a bit unfitting, so to speak. See, the truth of the matter is, despite how our opinions can be about the Pokemon movies, at their core, they're still tie-in products to a children's franchise meant to motivate little kids to buy a bunch of toys, at the end of the day. Sure, the quality of the plot, animation, and music, presentation, and delivery is something that can be judged in spite of those things, but at their core, they're supposed to be that. This is a movie that is clearly meant to be something like, say, 2001: A Space Odyssey, an abstract piece taking inspiration from specifically Eastern European art, specifically Soviet-era movies like Andrei Tarkovsky. and trying to create a product that feels more like of a gemstone with facets, which tells you to choose one, and asking you what you think about it. Of course, this is a very acquired taste because a lot of people will just want a more straightforward type of plot. And there's nothing technically wrong with that, but this movie clearly doesn't want to just limit themselves out of that. But
I mean, hell, I'm on Google, and it says, in a nutshell, fantastic, thoughtful, and dark.
the other major person involved with this is someone that, as a Final Fantasy fan, I know very well. The artist Yoshitaka Amano. Before working on the critically acclaimed RPG series, he was doing occasionally artistry work for some anime/manga lines, specifically this and Vampire Hunter D, which is also horror themed. Why look in the future? Why not? Because that one got 2 OVAs, so it's a bit more suitable for this room. But the last note is that the music is done by Yoshihiro Kanno in something that I would like to personally describe as mysterious and hauntingly beautiful. It's definitely memorable, especially the main theme. You might heard some of these since I bothered to use this in the intro and catch up kind of stuff. But other parts are definitely meant to unsettle you with a very imposing score. And if it sounds familiar to you, it's because this movie is definitely a fan favorite of From Software developer and director Hidetaka Miyazaki, which he bothers to reference in a lot of the Dark Souls and similar games that he develops. Specifically, more Bloodborne and Elden Ring tend to have direct reference to this. To an extent, also the DLC of the Dark Souls 3.
That's one thing I noticed when I was looking into a bit more about this movie was a lot of people doing the whole Dark Souls brought me here.
All right, then.
Quite interesting that
So
recently
what you're telling me is nothing is original and everyone gets their inspiration from something?
It depends on how you perform that, Dej.
No, it means you need to watch this movie to truly understand the entirety of the Dark Souls
Speaking
franchise.
of which, one of the major reasons why I also wanted to do this is because this year is the 40th anniversary of the movie, and it is finally getting a 4K remaster, courtesy also of G-Kids, which means a limited theatrical release. By the time recording this, it might actually also arrive in my country for the big screen, so I might even give it a chance for that. Who knows if it will happen or not. But also for home video. Yes, it took 40 years to finally get an actual Western release of the original version of this movie. More on that later, as Jova was suggesting. Which is baffling to say, because in terms of licensing, this shouldn't really cost that much. There isn't much in terms of a score, in terms of length of a score. In terms of dubbing, it's one of the easiest jobs you have to do because, spoiler, there are not many lines of dialogue in the movie. So,
look, if you've seen the trailer, you've actually probably heard more than half of the whole dialogue even said.
So it baffles me why no one even tried to actually properly, translate this in a, direct kind of manner. Again, we'll get there in a second.
My best guess is, well, might as well put this right out here. The reception to this movie has always had quite a history of being mixed. Very, very mixed. Now, there are a lot of people speaking its praises, even back in the day when it released. There were a lot of detractors as well. It says something that some of the most notable detractors over in Japan were Hayao Miyazaki, yes, that Hayao Miyazaki, and apparently the creator's own mother, who said upon watching the film that nobody would watch his films anymore.
Well, maybe Miyazaki is friends with his mother. I don't know.
It's very weird because
Maybe Miyazaki should make better movies.
But to be fair, this movie in a lot of ways is the antithesis of the average Studio Ghibli movie when you get down to it. But let's actually properly, give context to the audience of what it is about, which wouldn't really take that long, so go on, Jova. I would ask the normal question of when and where are we, but that in itself is a bit weird to ask.
And kind of a bit of a spoiler and whatnot.
So let's to quote Beyond Two Souls. If we need to start from somewhere, might as well here.
So, our story begins in a crisp 80s drawn background. Like, I just look at this film and I definitely get a sense of the 80s. We're in a literal checkerboard field, which I'll admit, when I first saw, the first inkling I got was, so this is what became of Green Hill Zone after all those years.
Bad future.
There's a figure with a cool looking cross, essentially, who's watching, I guess, what I can only describe as a mechanical sun, which looks like a half-lid closed eye. I say it's the sun because the sunset seems to rise, or the sunrise seems to come when this mechanical object shows up, essentially. We see the sunset first, actually, and upon this mechanical sun are a bunch of statues, figures, some of which almost seem angelic in some form or whatnot, but we have no idea what this means.
It also
upon
emits
it,
a
we
lot
hear-
of steam. It's very loud.
Yes, and upon this we hear the arc words of this movie, "Who are you?" Which, again, like I mentioned, that's gonna be like over 50% of the actual dialogue in this movie. So, after that, we then focus on one of, I'd say, our main characters, but literally one of the only two characters, Girl. No,
Yeah,
that's
the characters do
actually
not
what
have
she's referred
official
to as.
name. This one that we start with is either
Probably on
called
purpose.
the girl.
I will say that the other character, yeah, kind of get a good idea of who he is, but on that later. But yes, the girl, voiced by Mako Hyodo, and apparently, supposedly for the upcoming English release, Brianna Knickerbocker.
Which is a good choice. When we watched again in preparation of this, I was joking to Jova, Dejin Shirei that they could have got for her Cassandra Lee Morris. Because, she's kind of fits for this role. But Brianna is actually, not that bad.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, she wakes up to a rather dull look, but she seems to overall have a relatively upbeat attitude. As upbeat as one can be in what clearly looks like a very derelict and spooky forest that would make even the Snow White forest go, okay, let's tone it down a bit. So, all she has with her are a cloak to go over her pink dress and an egg. A very big egg, and that egg is quite possibly the best justification for why this is our Halloween input for a Pokemon podcast. But that's not the only egg. Oh no, there's apparently another egg, a giant egg, a bird's egg, which literally has a bird fetus in it, which may or may not be alive because its eyes seem to quiver as if it's trying to open them, essentially. Anyway, the girl leaves, because, of course, in typical anime fashion, she jumps without taking the stairs, the first time anyway, and exits off of what I first thought to be what looked like a giant baby carriage, or, well, an homage to Noah's Ark, but more on that later, and goes off to get water. Yeah, if you're expecting there to be any deep cause or concern for what she's doing, don't. Not much really happens in this movie, honestly. It's more like an observation. Of course, there have been a lot of theories that suggest that actually everything is going on during this, but for what we actually see on the screen, as far as we know, she's going about her typical rounds through essentially the areas of the world here, which are a grassy field, a desolate beach, a creepy forest, and possibly most notably, what appears to be an abandoned city, essentially.
The architecture
Hard to
seems to be mostly European based without having to specify which specific, maybe a bit of Austrian, French, and Italian sprinkled throughout. Definitely influenced by coastal cities, so could also be Greek, for example.
Yes, and it seems she's all alone, with the only other company being these, well, what I assume to be at first odd-looking statues of fishermen in the distance. Again, more on that later. Surprised I have to say that this much with this plot.
Don't start a
But
drinking
no.
game.
But no, where the other character shows up is when a train of tanks show up, essentially, which Yeah, those tanks look like they would not look out of place in Cowboy Bebop, I'll be quite honest. However, as Teos pointed out, it's implied that there might be something a little biological about those tanks, maybe a bit of a lobster DNA in there and whatnot. That said, from one of the tanks descends our other character for this called
Boy.
Boy. In the Japanese version, played by Jinpachi Nezu, and for the English version, played by apparently a relatively unknown Justice Slocum.
Let
Never
me
heard of
see.
this one
He has been
before.
working for Sega stuff recently, most notably the Persona 3 remake, like a Dragon, Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii, and
Okay.
Infinite Wealth has additional voices, Street Fighter 6 for Capcom, and some of the Trails games. He's
Okay, so his career is going to skyrocket within the next couple of years then.
What, because of this? Oh, right,
No,
because of Attack is
because
Not
Persona.
Cooking.
He started
Uh,
in 2018, but it's clear that he's basically making his bones with this.
So yeah, now's probably a good time to mention that apparently one of the ideas of this movie is treated like a dream, since Oishi has gone on to say that this script and this movie idea kind of came to him in a dream, with the idea of the main theme of a dream seen by the girl, which is fitting since he came up with this idea from his continuation of Urusei Yatsura 2, Beautiful Dreamer, which, yes, is a movie deeply centered around dreams and whatnot, because, oh, this movie certainly seems as strange as a dream. The way our first two characters interact, essentially, is, well, absolute fear from the girl, essentially. But don't worry, the boy finally strikes up conversation, suggesting that she break the egg. And
Well, it's a
skirting a
bit. There's a bit of a pause in between that. Their first interaction is them just staring at each other. The girl is definitely a bit disturbed, but not super afraid. She scoodles back into an alley, and when she peeks back, the tank and boy are gone. Then a bit of time passes. She gets another bottle, of glass from a shop, empties the liquid inside, which could be wine, juice, whatever, just because she wants to fill it with water from one of the fountains, which has a fish motif. And afterward, when she's actually resting and eating some jelly jam that she had also pilfered from a shop, she notices again Boy. She notices that she has lost the egg in the meantime, and that's when Boy instead actually offers, a gesture of goodwill by literally taking, his free hand and offering her back the egg, saying that he found it, but he doesn't want to keep it for himself. It's one of the more iconic images of the entire movie. But as Jova said, their first actual dialogue is the girl asking, "Who is him?" He doesn't answer. He has a reason for it, but we'll have to get to it later. But when he asks to her what's in the egg and she doesn't know or want to tell him, he literally chimes in saying, "You must break an egg in order to know what's inside." And we immediately cut back, not to dialogue, but we immediately cut back to the girl having a very distraught, scary face. I know that it probably wasn't meant to actually be a comedic moment, but the timing is absolutely perfect.
Yeah, this movie has a few bits that one could describe as comedic, and I'm definitely certain that those were all unintentional. Thankfully,
Reminder, this all happens directly after he tells her that she should keep it safe.
Getting weird
sending
mixed
mixed
messages.
messages there. So, yeah, that conversation goes about as well as you can imagine, and she pretty much dashes off, essentially, not wanting him to follow her, essentially. But he persists, surely out of the goodness of his heart, and not to just look like a creep. Yeah, as you can imagine, with this being a Yoshitaka Amano art, essentially, everyone looks exhausted. And that does not help the creepiness when they stare directly into the camera at
Yeah, there's a lot of
times.
Kubrick-inspired stares in this movie. Again, mostly because Yoshitaka Amano's art ranges between that and, unfortunately, characters potentially looking a bit derpy with the dull surprise, expression on their faces.
Imagine a Stanley Kubrick adaptation of Angel's Egg.
I mean, the guy at one point considered making a Warhammer 40k movie. This might have been the thing that was missing from the jackpot that he was doing in terms of genre. An adaptation from an animated movie.
And honestly, Angel's Egg feels like something that would be up his alley, since if there's one thing Stanley Kubrick loved to work with, if 2001 A Space Odyssey is anything to go by, it is the very unorthodox in terms of filmmaking, because yes, this is more or less the movie, just these two observing the derelict city overall, essentially.
It's worth noting that,
Which,
since we didn't mention it, the atmosphere is constantly, outside of the very beginning, which has the sunset or sunrise, depending on how you look at it, which has a disguise a bit red tinted. The rest of the movie, up until the very end, is immersed in the night. It's never stated up until the very end if it's a case where the sun doesn't rise anymore or the sky is always clouded. But the point is that it's always a very dreary, very darkened. The electric lights of the city are always, up there, classic Victorian style, lampposts. And but that contributes to give the movie a sense of, disconcern.
yes, well, yes. While recently it's been up to debate how religious the creator actually was, one thing that is certain is that he was going through a state of depression while this movie was
Yeah.
being made, and oh boy, does it show, essentially. In fact, he was apparently so deep in depression that nowadays even he isn't entirely sure what he meant with all these parts of this movie, essentially. It's kind of like the equivalent of a shrug going, I don't know. I was really in the zone back then. Now, apparently, he did give an interview in 1985, which does shed some light on it, but I'll save that for when we actually get to the end, because, believe it or not, that involves spoilers. Although, technically, certain covers of this movie also kind of spoil bits of the plot, but again, we'll get to that when we get to that. Anyway, so over time, the girl starts to warm up a bit to the boy. The boy seems to warm up a bit to the girl, even offering to shield her from the rain when it comes. But not only that, okay, it turns out they are not entirely alone. For the fishermen, who I mentioned earlier, who appear to be statues, now are fully animated and are chasing fish, essentially. Although fish that aren't really there. Okay, while people have a lot of theories for what stuff means and whatnot, one of the ones almost everyone seems to struggle with deciphering the most what fits in is the fisherman. This is partly due to what it turns out the main message of the film overall is, and given the biblical stuff, people are kind of left wondering this. But all you need to know for now is that a bunch of fishermen are chasing the shadows of fish, essentially. All to the point where they're even destroying part of the architecture with their harpoons, staking the shadows of said fish.
It's worth noting that the fishermen all look the same outside of the pale gray statue-like appearance. They have the same kind of outfit. We don't see their eyes. Their expression never changed. The closest we see one emoting is that in one scene, one of them is actually gesturing the others to go in a specific direction in order to aim their harpoons in a specific way. But that's it. Otherwise, they're almost emotionless completely.
There is apparently one who may or may not be hunched over in sadness before we see them moving. Part of that interpretation has to do with, again, a certain other cut of this movie, which we'll get to explaining later, essentially. But yeah, for what reason they're doing this, we're not certain. For if they're ghosts or actual citizens or statues come to life, we do not know. But the movie does take a bit of a break time for the girl to enter what is clearly a church, essentially. And one of the best cases of using religious symbolism is, of course, getting to showcase the awesome architecture behind it, stained glass and everything. The girl seems to be content in her reclusion within there, and even talks to her reflection. We never hear what she says, essentially, but well, whatever it is, it's caught the boy's attention from outside, while meanwhile the statue soldiers are still wrecking the town, essentially. Unfortunately, the rain's just getting worse and worse, essentially, which means there's a flood coming. So, we need to get to the shelter. So the girl, now deciding to trust the boy, takes her back to her home, essentially, which is in an odd structure of sorts.
We get the
lot of
shot of the spiral
bows.
staircase that a couple of video games specifically from Square Enix, love to reference, particularly Final Fantasy VII and Kingdom Hearts 2. I know that there's a bigger allegory towards the Divine Comedy about the stairway to either hell or heaven, depending on the direction in which you're going. But it's also cool
It's
imagery.
it's kind of like how Ultraman does the cross thing that a lot of anime have copied, even though it's obviously a reference to the Bible.
Hmm.
But their main inspiration is to wear homaging Ultraman specifically.
You were warned about those stairs.
I told you about dog.
Tons of stairs to walk up and down, but one thing to take note of is the fact that there are a ton of bones, essentially, of all different manner of creatures and animals and whatnot. And it is here where the boy actually starts to open up a lot more. See, whereas the girl is what some might call naive but more upbeat and faithful, the boy is a lot more cynical, but apparently knowledgeable of the past, essentially. The one thing he apparently takes heavy issue with is that giant bird egg atop a tree, which he sees as a perversion of life or something. I bring up this scene because we have this, albeit somewhat trippy scene, which suggests that his arm is constantly stretching as he gestures to a drawing on the wall which resembles the tree holding the bird egg up top, essentially. And it's also of notice here that his hands are bandaged. So a man with bandaged hands where there could be holes, carrying a sci-fi, but still obviously a cross, essentially.
It's also worth noting that compared to the little girl, his skin is definitely darker in shade, which, spoilers for all the evangelicals, it might be more accurate to exactly what you're thinking.
He's also older,
Mm.
which I
Both
feel is also
characters do
important.
possess white hair, but yes, the boy definitely looks older.
Mhm.
So yeah, they trade some ideologies, and the girl has something to show him, essentially. So up they go the stairs before taking a seat, and then the boy divulges the girl in another story. The story of Noah's Ark. You know the drill. 40 days and 40 nights. Sound out a dove and a raven, essentially, to know when God was ready to tone down the waterworks and, let humanity grow anew. But not quite in this version. No, apparently in this case, rumor has it that God kind of went out for milk and left us to drown.
It's
That's
it's
a
a bit
simplified.
vague in how it describes, even poses different theories, like the dove never left, the dove died on the way, so land was never found, or something else entirely. He even breaks the fourth wall almost by looking at the camera and literally says, maybe you and I and the fish are just fictional characters in the dream of a dead person.
Which, yes, probably confirms that Link's Awakening probably got some inspiration from this, essentially. What if the flood never stopped, essentially, and Noah and his family were left to basically moan in despair, essentially? But hold on, that can't be right. We're on land now, so clearly, clearly things must have worked out. But in regards to faith versus faithlessness, the girl starts to open up on what she believes is in the egg. The dove, or in this case, an angel, to come back with that message, essentially. And it's not just faith she's going off of, she actually has proof. Proof that actually shakes the boy's foundations to his core to the point where we probably get the only time he has an expression full of fright, a gasp, and horror.
And just to make sure
That
that you're still in this mindset, the moment we cut to what he's saying, the music goes super hard in scaring the shit out of you.
pretty much a literal angel skeleton, essentially.
On a slab of
Could it have
stone, fossilized, which calls back to something that the boy had mentioned before in his recounting of Noah's Ark myth, his idea that possibly the animals and people had turned to stone for how much time had passed.
which, hey, would mean that they were fossilized in that regard. Now, again, for all we know, maybe a bunch of bones just managed to arrange themselves to look like an angel, but no, that looks like a clear-on angel skeleton, essentially. So, after that bout of horror, the girl and the boy settle down in her bedroom, and the girl pretty much wants the boy to stay, essentially, since she's taking compassion on him and figures, look, there's not really much point in him constantly moving on, since doesn't seem like there's really a place to go, essentially, which would beg the question, where'd he come from in that regard? But regardless, she takes compassion and she's like, you know what? You can stay with me, and you can wait and see until the egg hatches. And then she falls asleep, and he takes her to bed. And then we get probably one of the only scenes in the movie where people don't theorize about waiting for the fire to go out for
Yes,
darkness
you
to
have to
set
spend like
in.
2 minutes and a half having to see the scene where the fire goes out with nothing going on.
Look, I'm just gonna say this right now. It's clear that this movie was made on a budget,
Yes,
which at times holds it back.
But
That was
honestly, I feel like it did what it could with its limited budget very smart.
absolutely.
Because of the
I've
fact that
seen
we're
more
still
egregious instances of studios doing that, so I thought it was okay here.
there are also
Oh,
other
yeah.
places. There are also other places where it's done deliberately, despite the budget, mostly for the sake of either comedic timing or to teasing the audience. Most notably, the elevator sequence in Evangelion.
the fact that we're even having this discussion about this movie, despite some of its shortcomings from the behind the scenes, speaks more about the value of the work itself.
It clearly was doing something right. Also, one thing to keep in mind, even if this movie was arguably cheap by anime standards, one of the positives of it being an anime from the 80s is even arguably the cheap stuff still looked gorgeous. Mind you, some might have taken it for granted and not knowing how cheap animation could really look, essentially,
This
but
was almost at
regardless,
the end of the dark age of animation anyway. While Japan was not almost affected at all compared to the West, there were some tendrils reaching that too.
but yeah, no, like, for all people have to theorize, everyone pretty much agrees that the fire scene is just there for padding.
Yeah.
So, what does the boy do when the light's out? Well, he takes the egg, poses dramatically, then proceeds to smash it and then ore farm on a rooftop.
Worth noting
I'm
though
not even
that
exaggerating, that's
du-
literally what happens.
during the actual scene of the smashing, you can kinda tell with his expression he's not of joy, but of sorrow. He's not taking pleasure in the act.
Although, honestly, I doubt he ever really seems to feel joy throughout this movie, unless we go by certain
I have
theories.
thoughts on that.
There are some times where he actually has a bit of a sardonic kind of smile. It's just a tinge of that, so he's not completely emotionless.
So, yeah, the girl wakes up to find the egg smashed. Now, we never actually see any hints that a thing was in it, like, afterbirth, blood, yolk, or anything. Whether that is to tone down any gruesome imagery, I don't know if they had to do anything for rating, age rating, or whatnot, or if that is to showcase that the egg was never full, is probably up to the viewer,
Yeah.
essentially, but, yeah, needless to say, that leaves the girl devastated. So devastated that when she leaves the next time, she actually properly takes the stairs instead of jumping down like an anime character like she did the first time. I don't know, maybe it's a showing of the shattering of innocence and how she knows it's time to get real. In fact, she goes to confront that boy. I don't know whether to give him a piece of her mind and punch him out or
Just
tell
asking
him
why.
thanks or something or ask why. Regardless, unfortunately, it seems that she forgot that there's a gap because right as she's about to reach him, yeah, she falls down the gap into the water where she ages up essentially physically.
She had a vision of
And
that during the initial scene. One vision of her in the water and one of her being grown up. With whatever it was foreshadowing or something more, again, I'll also up to interpretation.
There's a lot of imagery of her and water specifically.
in fact, when she drowns, from her breath comes a bunch of eggs, which I think are implied to later become some of those more giant eggs we see later on in the film, but Yeah, we're pretty much left to believe that she is dead now.
Especially because of
Bummer.
what happens in the last major sequence in the movie.
So the boy, still ore farming, now is surrounded by a flock of feathers, interestingly enough, almost as if they came from birds that are coming to life. And now from the water once again rises what I conclude to be a mechanical sun, because when the mechanical sun rises, so does apparently the light of a sunrise, essentially. And the boy looks up to the mechanical sun to see the girl there, now a statue, with her egg, with a smile on her face. But the movie's not over yet. For as we see the boy on the beach, we pull away slowly,
Slowly.
slowly, very ever
Wake
so
up,
This takes
Drova.
like
slowly.
3 minutes.
And then it turns out, egads, that wasn't just our world that they were on. No, they were on what appears to be the overturned hull of a boat.
A big
Which we
boat.
can positively believe was Noah's Ark. Now, how they survived that boat overturning and managing to build vegetation, a city, and I guess means to sustain some life is beyond me, but yes, it turns out the world we see is the boat, surrounded by what must be just the ever encompassing ocean or whatnot.
For extra
Is the world.
depression, if you want to watch this movie, watch beforehand the original 1933 Silly Symphony about Noah's Ark.
Jesus.
I haven't seen that.
I'll show you later that, don't worry.
Why do you hate me?
It's for your own good.
Mm-mm-mm. Okay, so before we really do a deep dive into this, I should probably bring up the 1985 interview Oishi said, essentially, which this is probably the closest we'll get to his proper thoughts on the movie since, 1985,
Close
the
to the
year the
release,
movie came
yes.
out. He said in a 1985 interview with Animage that the contents of the egg are supposed to represent dreams and hopes, something that may or may not exist, and that while the girl believed in what was in it, by breaking the egg, the boy showed that what she believed in did not exist. Regarding the bird the boy talks about, though the girl shows the boy an angel fossil in order to convince him that the bird does exist, Oishi went on to say that the angel is not the bird. Finally, he also said that the ending was one with salvation in mind for the girl, but he didn't want it to be shown in a straightforward way and made it specifically hard to understand. So, supposedly, at least according to him back in 1985, that's supposed to be a happy ending.
It really depends on your interpretation. While it's easy to believe that the breaking of the egg is an act of evil to go against the wishes of the girl, which, and to an extent, it still technically is because it's, non-consensual. Just as much, one can be viewed as freeing the little girl out of stagnation of delusion that she was going to, rapidly spiral in, which can be viewed in different metaphors of similar cases, including very delicate topics such as, for example, euthanasia.
Wonderful.
That would be it for the
Needless
movie, Paul. But we're kind of remiss to not talk about the one attempt that happened in order to import this in the West, specifically 3 years after this, so not even too long after this. Someone tried to, specifically not directly, but a company that was created, if I recall correctly, by Roger Corman, I forgot which specific one, created a movie that takes pieces of this movie, rearranges them, dubs over them to give a complete different kind of setting and story, and intersperses in live action sequences to try to tie in together sequences that are happening. If you know anything about Roger Corman, you know that things tend to be on the cheap and strange of their own. But this movie, which remind me again, Joe, it's called In the Aftermath, I think.
in the aftermath, angels never,
Never
sleep.
Sleep, which sounds the title of a Devil May Cry side chapter. But
Yes.
this is unique, cheap, probably goes against everything this original version goes on, but it is a bit interesting nonetheless. I don't think we should waste too much time on the story, mostly because maybe we'll talk about it more in depth someday. But Jova, please tell us what you think of that.
I'm gonna say this. I was expecting to hate that movie, but having seen it, I don't think it's the bastardization some people make it out to be. Okay, first and foremost, the original Angel's Egg is like a Rorschach test, essentially. Like, you go in, you see it, you take from it what you will. It's in some ways a frustrating movie to critique because it walks that very thin line of being way too vague to get anything or being deeply cerebral that you have to have a high IQ to understand it and all that jazz, essentially. The
No.
point is, the point being is like, well, Angel's Egg is one of those few cases where somebody could make the argument that it's the most amazing masterpiece fought film, or it's really just a movie that's coasting on its visuals and vagueness to appear masterful and is cheap in that regard. And I would say either argument is valid, like no hot takes whatsoever, because yes, Angel's Egg was indeed held back by its budget. Like, okay, obviously a remake is probably nowhere near in the cards, essentially, but I
hope to
do,
God they don't.
I mean, you know, if this movie becomes popular thanks to that 4K remaster, then, well, knowing how the Japanese industry can be with that stuff, who knows? But I do get the feeling some stuff might have been extended or maybe drawn on a bit more if they had more of a budget, essentially. And this is part of why I actually found myself kind of unironically enjoying In the Aftermath Angels Never Sleep, because holy cow, they actually do kind of work the plot in a way that some might understand. And hey, congratulations to Tio. One of his theories is more or less confirmed in that version,
Though
essentially.
it's still a lot vague. We don't know where exactly are we. We don't know what caused the apocalypse in that one. We know that the soldiers the live action soldiers try to speak with a British accent, even though they're
Well,
Americans. Um,
I think it's only one that speaks with the British accent. From what I understand, Frank pretty much just speaks with a regular American accent.
But the pieces of the OVA that are interspersed are completely recontextualized and possibly given
Yes.
what I call the Highlander 2 treatment. Outside of the characters calling themselves Angel, the religious metaphors are gone. There's no mention of Noah's Ark. And instead, it's all replaced with dialogue about stories on people on different alien planets that do something, and the egg is more of a test that the child has to give. Like I said, I don't want to waste too much time on the plot of that version because we probably will talk about it in the future in
It
some
honestly
degree.
does deserve its own talk. But
It's
the
just
thing
a
is
different beast altogether. But while I do agree with Jova, what he said, I argue the principle of the thing is still, particularly sour because apparently mentioned even in interviews by Carl Colpert, the director, and the producer Tom Dugan, they saw the original film, claimed that they did not understood it, called incomprehensible, and opted to shoot the live action sequences in order to quote unquote make more sense for the audience. While again, this intent is noble, in the end, wanting to believe that you can try to, give your own opinion about it and adding some stuff in reinforcing to that. This is the stuff that I argue works better for a web video, for someone reviewing the movie, or someone who wants to have an analysis of it, not necessarily to a company that wants to make a profit out of it, and especially one that, while admittedly completely crediting the original source, does not give the audience the idea to understand how the original product was. For a lot of people, specifically in America, because I don't know up until the recent DVD or Blu-ray if this was released even in Europe. Australia, I think so, but mostly for American and Australian audience, this was the version of Angel's Egg that they got up until the early days of the internet, basically.
And believe it or not, that even got a Blu-ray 2K restoration before the original
Yeah, I
Angel's
bothered
Egg,
to check on
too.
Amazon. They actually are selling that in my country. I'm not getting it because I don't think I particularly need it. If I am curious and I run into that, I'll probably give it a look on how it looks in HD. But it's interesting to see that there is still a market despite everything.
I will say this. I was not expecting a Roger Corman company to be one of the few people who actually dedicates themselves to rendering the animated characters in live action actually pretty well, believe it or
I mean,
not.
this is the
Jesus Christ.
same thought process that led us to what basically was the best Fantastic Four movie before First Steps. So
Yes, that is true. And I will
that's sad.
look, I will also say this. I feel like, in a way, in the aftermath, Angels Never Sleep feels like something that works as a companion piece to Angel's Egg. In fact, if you go with the theory that Tio has regarding Angel's Egg, which I'm sure he'll explain later, you could consider in the aftermath Angels Never Sleep to kind of be a weird pseudo sequel to Angel's Egg, essentially. It's complicated, but we'll probably explain that more on further analysis of the film. Basically, I'll just say this out and out. Is it the ideal way to have brought the movie over in English? No. Am I glad it exists? Oh, yes. Even ignoring just the sheer laughing factor I have, it's almost like an abridged product brought to life. Like an abridged product, it recontextualizes scenes from the original, dubs them in a way that works with the limited animation on play here, and even intersplices characters into other scenes like an abridged project or whatnot, essentially. Basically, I do recommend watching both. It was probably for the best, though, that I saw Angel's Egg first before seeing In the Aftermath. In fact, I'll be quite honest, I probably wouldn't have known about either if Tio hadn't told me about it, because somehow Angel's Egg is something that went under my nose for pretty much all up until this year, essentially, despite all the references at it. Which I think has to do with the fact that, sadly, when this movie released, it was a bomb.
Yeah. And again, as we
In
mentioned,
both.
also polarizing in terms of, critical reception, which again, it's similar to 2001 Space Odyssey. It really is understandable. This is not exactly the ideal blockbuster movie that is pleasing for mass audiences that want a straightforward story.
So, I was gonna say, so this is basically like Tron. While it's very influential to a lot of creators, as we've discussed how much media has taken from it. It wasn't really the critical darling or financial success as you'd think.
I would say the main difference
Hell,
is
I
that
didn't even hear about this movie until Teo showed it to me.
literally the same. I'd say part of the difference is that Tron is at least something the regular Joe is likely to hear about, partly thanks to Kingdom Hearts and Disney even incorporating Tron stuff into their parks and whatnot. It's just that Disney have this weird relationship with Tron where they seem to respect it, even made the Tron ride well after Legacy had bombed, but yet it seems to be a film franchise they don't want to take risks with unless they have someone else footing the bill. And that's how we got Tron Ares, starring Jared Leto, who funded it.
Topical.
But goody gumdrops in that regard. When it comes to Angel's Egg, though, it's very influential, but it's definitely a very niche sort of film. And I will say this, I kind of do get a bit annoyed whenever people say, oh, people just didn't get it. Like, this film absolutely deserved to succeed, and anyone who didn't get it is dumb. Look, I'll just say this right now. It's literally a movie that you can take whatever you get from it, but that also works the other way around. If
Mm-hmm.
you watch this movie and just feel bored with it, you are legit in feeling that way. I'm not saying it's the right way, but there is specifically no right way to see this movie. And if people just weren't interested in this kind of, deep thinker where not much else happens, that's unfortunately one of the breaks of it, essentially. As far as I know, the film did get its own fair shot of advertising still, so it's not like this thing got sabotaged like, say, Treasure Planet, essentially. As far as I know, this movie had its shot, but it just
Well,
didn't get
it
the best.
wasn't. If I recall, okay, this was animated by Studio Dean, which I don't remember if at the time, was that known or illustrious among people to have enough of
But they did this
marketing.
movie?
Yep,
Hmm.
Studio Dean, the same guys behind the original Higurashi and the original Fates Stay Night
Also,
anime.
Ranma and a half, so they have a bit of experience also with.
Quite a variety of stuff going on there.
Mm-hmm. But I think to complement what Joe was saying, there is an analysis of Pink Floyd's The Wall, the movie, that I think better encapsulates the thought process. To paraphrase a bit what he was said, whenever you like the movie, love the movie, or hate the movie, whenever you're expressing an opinion on it, it has to come from somewhere. It doesn't just leave you with nothing in it. Even if it's a case of apathy, you still technically express that. This is a movie that demands your opinion on it no matter what. This is not
Hmm.
something like, say, a cash in from a director like Michael Bay that serves there to be just for instant pleasing, but it leaves you potentially with just minor satisfaction and nothing to have as an opinion. Nor is it maybe a case of a deep provoking story that makes you tell a lot of things at the moment, but later you almost feel like you wasted your time. This is definitely something that, no matter what is your opinion, it provokes something in you to actually say that.
For me personally, I do think it's a very good effort what they have going for it. But I do feel like some things are just a little bit missing. Like, I've gone on to say on record that one thing I feel is missing is the girl actually getting to confront the boy about what happened before or after her death or whatnot. Like, I feel like maybe that could have been included. And again, I'm not going to act like I'm a mind reader, but part of me does get the feeling that some things might have been different or more extended if this film had more of a budget to go off on. I forget if the reason it got curtailed in the budget was because the studio didn't really have much faith in the idea or whatnot, or if it was just what Oishi could get at the time.
No idea. I don't think we even register how much of a budget this had. The length we didn't mention, it's 71 minutes. While the pace is very slow, so you don't really feel how much shorter this actually is. It's basically like the original Bambi, not that much more than an hour. You know.
And I can't imagine that this film might have helped with Oishi's depression since unfortunately he didn't get work for like 4 years after this movie, which is damn pretty harsh, but I don't know. Maybe the mentality is nobody really wanted to hire the guy who made like one of the biggest bombs of the time, essentially. But hey, like with many things, time has been very kind to this movie, essentially, as it's
Chris
now
Tuckman
a
used to
cult
have a
classic.
video talking about his own analysis, but that got taken down because of copyright, unfortunately. A lot of more essays actually have, cropped up over the years, so you can just literally type that on a YouTube search bar and you will find a couple of them. There are some really good ones if you want to just have something in the background while you're playing something, while just listen about, because, visual-wise, you don't need it too much to actually have one of these video essays. Speaking of which, now that we're done with the plot and everything, I hope you understand, audience, that because of what we just told you, our usual type of awards are not particularly applicable to this movie. We have only literally,
Oh,
We're
we
not
literally have
doing
only
that.
what?
two characters and a set
Oh,
of
what are you
scenes
talking
that,
about? We
because
also
of
have.
what we said, are not that could not particularly be described as best or worst.
What are you talking about? There's also the fisherman, the statues, the
Ah, yes,
non-existent
my
fish. There's
favorite
tons of
character,
characters.
Shadowfish.
Exactly.
Megalodon.
It's funny that we laugh and all that because some trivia also reveals that, okay, believe it or not, originally Oishi had intended on making this a comedy, essentially.
I mean, if you actually properly have an idea on what to do with your tools and the way you recobble these, you could still pull it off, depending on what kind of music interactions you do. I argue, a thing that I want to mention back when, if we actually get back to In the Aftermath, is one of the initial line that gets redubbed. absolutely sends me because it's part of a dialogue that the boy has with girl. But in that movie, he literally says something like, I forgot the precise line, something like, it's custom for angels to be angels. And he says that with a very, very weird dubbing to the character, all the while the most generic, low pop techno music is in the background replacing the haunting score. That alone
Meanwhile,
should send you for that.
the most famous line from that movie seems to be, "Oh, my brother, he was lenient. He should have spanked me with asteroids."
Yeah, it's a fucking acid
It-
trip if you get into the right mindset. But we're not here for that. Instead of our usual wartime, I think it's more appropriate to actually express what do we think of a movie, not in terms of final thoughts. Those are for that comes for later, but more about what is our respective interpretation of the movie and its themes. So,
well,
Jova,
yeah. First up with the analysis and whatnot. Just gonna say it. I'm putting my money on saying that that boy is either meant to be God, or Jesus, or a form of God, essentially coming back and realizing, I left a bit of a mess here since, again, bandaged hands, carrying a cross, like Jesus, essentially. Quite possible. As for the girl, there's a lot of interpretations on who or what she might be. I have heard some theories posit that she is actually the dove, and the egg is, well, hers. Her being the dove who couldn't find land, and the egg being the egg she can't lay because no land or nourishment, essentially. And supposedly Jesus slash God is here to free her from that burden, essentially. Another theory going about is that the two are actually angels. This is actually a theory Tia told me about, but I'll probably let him go more into his own talks with that. But one of the main ones I've heard is that the idea is that these two are angels and the girl is being tested, essentially. And supposedly her faith is a showcasing of her passing the test, and the boy breaking the egg is freeing her from that, essentially. One could also maybe argue that the girl is really blind to just how desolate the world is. Back when this was originally supposed to be a comedy, it was supposed to start with the girl first getting off of a flying ark in front of a Japanese convenience store. I'm gonna guess the revelation would have been that all that is ruined and whatnot.
possibly. Maybe
Okay.
the idea was to have it more whimsical for the first two-thirds, or almost its entirety, and then the bombshell dropping at the end. It wasn't too
It w-
uncommon as a type of storytelling back then.
Which, if I recall correctly, Oishi had mostly been known for comedy work at that sense, so,
Well, did you watch the
God.
two Urusei Yatsura OVAs that they did before this?
Yes, they are very funny. They do have serious moments, but they're
I mean, yeah,
first
that's
and
basically
foremost
what the
comedies,
series
yeah.
is about, so I'm not too surprised.
It's really interesting to consider. Now, like I've mentioned, I'm not entirely sure about the fishermen, but maybe if I was to put my thinking cap on it, essentially, the fishermen are maybe meant to represent the chasing of lost dreams or ideas, essentially, or literally ghosts of the past, showcasing how I guess the people that Noah and his family produced were trying their best to survive given the lack of resources and whatnot on the fishing boat and whatnot. And obviously, the shattered and ruined churches showcase stuff leading up to the crisis of faith that Oishi may or may not have been having at the time, essentially. Since one thing is certain, this is meant to be like a dark, evil version of the Bible in the sense that this is a version where God gave up after the flood or abandoned humanity for whatever reason and just left the flood going,
And if
essentially.
you lived under a rock and never even know that much about the Old Testament, which regardless of if you're religious or not, you might have been exposed in some capacity via pop culture osmosis because of books, movies, references and so on. Old Testament is already full of depressing dark shit with people dying left and right and being judged harshly for their actions. So this is amplifying that.
Pretty much. Imagine a darker, more twisted version of the Old Testament. Goodness gracious. I definitely have a radar for when people are using superficial Christianity to sort of bolster a film that, let's be honest, otherwise has just nothing to say. I'm looking at you, Sunday School Musical. This one, okay, I can believe that Oishi definitely actually is trying to say something with the Christian elements here or there. How much of what's actually being said is, once again, up for debate, essentially. But I do feel like one thing that is clear is the battle between faith or cynicism, essentially. Now, ideally, the two should come together for a sense of realism, or at the very least, having faith, but having it within reason and obviously not using it for dickish purposes and whatnot, and showcasing how too much of either end can lead in disaster, essentially. The angel skeleton itself really does showcase that something is very amiss and perverted about this time, essentially. The potential death of faith or death of hope, in a way. Whereas the egg is meant to showcase that hope and faith, which, well, we all know what happens when it breaks. Or do we, since the girl's. Again, I'm going to agree that she probably died there. Her death supposedly creates new life. But at the end of the film, are we led to believe that that life is worthful or worthless, seeing as how, well, we're on the overturned ark, which is probably going to eventually succumb to the waves, so. Yeah. Again, I do find it a bit twisted that, again, according to Oishi in 1985, I emphasize since nowadays it seems like even he's not entirely sure, but according to that interview back then, that was supposed to be a happy ending, or at least showing of salvation for the girl. Maybe because of it. Of course, if you posit the theory that the girl and the boy are angels and say they're both amnesiac, but seeing that skeleton boosted the boy's memory, so he was actually doing that to send the girl back to heaven, essentially. That just creates a funny image in my mind where when he finally catches up to her back in heaven, she goes, "What the hell?" And he goes, "What? It worked? Yes, in the most dramatic way possible." Well, our Lord does indeed work in mysterious ways. Why should we be any different?
Yeah, all the time,
That's
all eternity for therapy.
And again, if you consider in the aftermath, Angels Never Sleep a sequel, since in that one the movie pretty much comes out right and says that the animated characters are angels, essentially. You could argue
Although
that
I
this is
wonder
her
if
finally
it's
getting to do her
if,
job
although I
proper.
wonder if they mean it in the Star Wars way of being an alien species called angels, but again, that's a story for another time.
Is this
To their
expanded universe stuff?
Maybe
No comment.
expanded
Moving on.
universe on Angel's Egg. Again, can you imagine if someday a sequel and or a remake is made? But again, I digress. To its credit, the devil is mentioned in that, which does lead to me to believe that they're angels, but yeah. Overall, this is my take on Angel's Egg here, so what do you guys think was overall going on?
Deji, what about you?
I believe that this movie is a representation of humanity and and the world that was lost. While the girl had faith, was more optimistic, the boy knew the reality of the situation, the cold, barren world.
I thought you were about to say war because we've got the tanks, and I do feel like the
Yes,
fishermen in some
he
ways
does
do.
because he is a soldier for all things considering. Look at
His
his motif.
cross
As
is
far as we're concerned.
yeah,
Like, yeah.
his cross at the first you might think it's a rifle, but no, it's a blunt object, and it's done deliberately with a motorcycle handle. It's fucking weird, but it definitely is meant to be a weapon.
How
So
fitting
he's
that
most likely seen the true horrors of the world has seen, and
and I
I wanted the girl to open the eyes of reality.
which is
I don't think he intended for her to commit suicide, but it is interesting that her death caused more eggs to form, which makes me wonder if this is supposed to be a never-ending cycle, and maybe somebody might one day break through it. Despite the harshness of the world, You just have to keep moving forward.
Hmm.
Also, the Noah's Ark reveal. What?
All right.
Actually, one more thing.
Go on.
With all the soldiers that were fighting the fish in the shadows, made me wonder. Yeah, they're on a boat, and what they're seeing is just the shadows of the fish, and they think that it's like, oh, these are enemies. Like, no, they're not.
It's interesting because one thing I posit is that the fishermen do look like they could be World War I soldiers or whatnot. Technically, yes, they're dressed like fishermen, but they do look drawn in a way that it could be similar to that. And one does have to wonder, was there a war, given that there are tanks, and yet how are those tanks operating, and why is the boy the only soldier supposedly there?
It's worth noting that the specific spearing of the fishing is a reference to some particular, techniques of fishing from the Mediterranean, coastline cities, particularly from my country, Spain, Greece, and Portugal to an extent, where is a large group of fishes is trapped in specific location and then literally slaughtered. The technique is literally translatable as slaughtering, using harpoons to actually spear them into submission. It's very gruesome. Borders on animal cruelty, but it's basically a different way of hunting food. So it's basically primitive in its conception.
Which, hey, if we consider them soldiers and the boy is one of the soldiers, I guess it makes sense why he uses, of all things, the cross, a symbol of hope and religion, to smash the egg, another symbol of hope, essentially.
Alright, Shiri, what about you?
I actually have some similar thoughts to Deji, actually, particularly about the fishermen, because I know that, a lot of people are quite stuck on that one. But yeah, I think the world, at least as it stands in the movie, has long died out, and everything's very barren and empty. But whatever is left of humanity is still trying to just take what they can, but they just end up causing more harm instead. And as for why they don't see the girl or the boy, either the ghost theory could work, or they're just so I wouldn't say one track minded, but
Focused on
I
their
don't know.
task, huh?
Yeah, that they just don't perceive anything else around them whatsoever.
We don't even see
And
them as threats, is worth noting. There's a deliberate
yeah.
sequence where the fishermen literally pass near and by the boy, but don't bump into him, don't bother attacking him or telling him to get out of the way. They just move.
Yeah, they just keep going the whole time. And, everything we see at the end just, I just feel like the current state of the world, it's already pretty, not quite dead, but it's not great at the time. But yeah, in general, I feel like crisis of faith is the main point for a lot of it. And I was going to ask, because you mentioned it specifically, but because I noted this as well when we watched the movie, does he actually reach the top of the tree when you have that shot of him, his hand
On the
panning
roof?
up to
Symbolically,
Okay.
his hand stands in
Mhm.
front of a mural. Then the shot is almost mimicking him extending the arm, but I guess what's happening is that the mural is passing behind to create that effect,
Mm.
and it reaches up until the point where the hand almost grabs the symbol on the mural of the egg and closes on it, which is something that happens also at the very beginning to an extent. We didn't talk about it. There are two shots of the hands of the girl and the boy. The girl is actually, having open palms and almost cuddling something in the air, while the boy is literally, crunching, closing them, and you hear a crunching sound.
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
I guess begs the question, what was up with that checkerboard at the start, since we never see that area again in
I
the
was going to
movie?
mention my interpretation, but continue, Shiroi.
Hmm. But I don't quite think it's a case of faith versus lack of faith, as Jova suggested. I feel like both of them have faith / had it, but the girl who we mentioned is portrayed more young and innocent, still like fully believes in hers, but for the boy who's older and again looks very exhausted constantly, he's probably experienced a lot that has probably shaken his faith a little bit. I also feel like that goes into breaking the egg, because I think seeing the skeleton of the angel slash bird that the girl shows him, like maybe led him to think like, oh, maybe there is still something there, and he breaks the egg to find nothing. As far as like what we see, like there was nothing there, and just he ends up destroying this girl's life over his own curiosity. And I know I'm probably making him sound a lot more malicious than I'm intending, but he's definitely a cold person. But I don't know, I just feel like they both just come from very different experiences of faith. And I feel like that's how that actually plays into how people interpret this movie as well.
I think your theory does give the suggestion that he might have felt guilty after doing that as well, so not entirely
Well, he doesn't
heartless
look
in that
like
regard.
he doesn't look happy when he's breaking it. Like
Cool.
I don't think he really wanted to do it like wholeheartedly.
No, and as you noted indirectly, he had ample opportunities to do that before, including the moment where the girl had lost it and he had recovered it. So,
Yeah, he gave it back to her.
yeah, so, him decide to breaking at that moment meant clearly that something changed in his way of thinking.
Not only that, like considering like how they're portrayed and stuff, like he's a soldier, he could clearly at any point take the egg even while she's there and awake, and she like what would she even be able to do about that? But no, he waits. Like I think he didn't plan to do it in the first place. It just, I don't know, like I said, I feel like seeing the fossil changed something in him at the point.
Of course, as you can imagine, him doing it while she sleeps has given some theorists some not so favorable impressions of
I'm
what
not
that's meant to
fond of
imply.
those particular
It's
theories.
clearly still a loss of innocence going from childhood to
Yeah, yeah.
adulthood, but it has the unfortunately a potential angle to that. I don't believe that was intention of Oshi, but the thing of the movie having these facets unfortunately leans it also into that kind of interpretation, which unfortunately,
This is
which you can chalk it up to say a modern fairy tale. Don't trust strangers or bad things will happen. Many versions of Little Red Riding Hood did end it this way, unfortunately.
I
admittedly, that's just one of the complications that comes with a movie being this open-ended. You can have
mhm.
amazing theories, but you can it does leave room for, unfortunately, some of the more cynical thoughts in mind.
Yeah. I want to say for the record, I don't think like this theory is so vague. No, sorry, this movie is so vague. I don't think that particular theory is invalid because we ultimately don't know. I'm just not a fan of it.
Hmm.
But as for that's it for my thoughts on how I interpret the movie,
That
though.
leaves
All
me.
right, then, Tio.
Honestly, my interpretation is tries to combine the literal and the abstract. On one hand, I can fully believe in what the movie is presenting to us, as the viewer with what it's showing to us. The idea that this is a bleak future where Noah's Ark's tale ended poorly, somehow worse than The Grey Man, which I didn't thought before seeing this movie could have happened, but here we are. Uh, the only two survivors, the only two possible human beings or God sent, wander into this desolate city, witness what's happening, and ultimately things change, and the movie then just stops. Because, yes, the last shot that we see is the panning out to reveal about the ark. We don't know what happened to the boy. So, outside of that, my personal belief is that the uh, spaceship sun at the beginning with the eye, which noted, small note, if you're a fan of Yu-Gi-Oh, you might know the same kind of expression with one of the number Xyz monster, big eye. It has the same kind of dejected, semi-closed eye, which is a reference to some versions of God, technically. But, I do wonder if it was also partially inspired by this. But I believe that the sun spaceship with the people attached to it is either a god or a presentation of the afterlife where the stones represent the people who are plugged in, Matrix style. And at the end, because the little girl died, she's also there too. Although the fact that she's with the egg might be also a representation of their delusion attached to it. More in a second. As for the fisherman and the shadows of the fish, to me it's pretty a short case about chasing what's unobtainable, no matter what you do, trying to recapture, something that you felt you were good at or that you believe you must attain, but the truth is that you will never be able to catch it, and it's a fool's errand, which could be a metaphor for fate to some degree, or potentially to false beliefs. Not necessarily the lack of faith or interpretation of faith, just, false beliefs altogether. It is a common theory, something that I personally believe in, that the informations that we are given towards in terms of, different scriptures and faith are incorrect to some degree, and we're all just speculating on, some different degrees of a fool's errand. Again, just a personal opinion, obviously. And the scene with the fisherman and the shadows of the fish reflect that to an extent. But it's something that the characters only, two main characters only comment on and note. The little girl seems to know more about it than boy. It's worth noting, despite both of them being amnesiac. She might have witnessed it a couple of times, but she does note the fact that the fishes are gone and only the shadows remain. So she has a bit more knowledge. But later, the boy, when he asked to her in her hideout if she's been here as many days as there are bottles, in which the place is completely littered in, she says no. So it is entirely possible maybe that she just arrived later and decided to finish the work in collecting the bottles and filling them with water. I don't know much of an explanation for that. Could be water has always been a way of representing purity, blessing, specifically running water, not stagnating water, and he's been adopted into a lot of religious, imagery and symbology in order to purify the soul and so on. So it could be tied to that. As for the two figures, my personal belief is that they're both angels. Specifically, little girl is angel number one, who was sent to the place in order to investigate by God, something similar to what Jova said. And but she failed her task to some degree, lost her memory, and basically wandered around aimless, not knowing what to do until she found the egg, believed that this was her purpose, and decided to stay there. Number two, the boy, which might be Jesus, might be not. Again, if you subscribing to Catholicism and the Trinity, you know about one, three into one, the Father, the Son, and Holy Spirit. So could be a combination of all three of them, but my personal belief would be just another angel. Arrives to check on the situation. The initial scene that we see with the checkerboard might be the actual afterlife paradise. There is a lot of mechanical stuff that is not in the rest of the movie to possibly confirm that. And when he finds the girl, his mission is to understand what her, it's her deal and what's the best efficient way to, get her back on track with the mission, or send her back to home base. And at the end, after witnessing the fossils, the mural, he decides that the best course of action will be to break the egg, which leads to a chain of events that leads to her demise. I don't think that the scene where her drowning bubbles turn into eggs is to be taken literally, just an abstract imagery that is happening. One interpretation that I do not personally follow, but is potentially viable, is that the entire dream is a nightmare from the bird at the very beginning, the one mentioned that as the eye twitching. And the reality of the matter is that that bird maybe is the dove of the original myth, but it's just having a nightmare, and then things will go, to normal anyway, for all we know. So in that way, you could still chalk it up to, yes, a very bleak ending, but with still a positive outcome on the long run. So there is technically that, but it's not the theory that I subscribe with. Like I said, and boy and girl are respective angels that needed to check on what was left of humanity and, pulling whoever was remaining and get back to home base, basically leaving the world for what it was.
And
That's
according to In
basically
the
it.
Aftermath, you are the winner in that
Except,
regard.
well, in the aftermath, it's more of a case where there are space aliens trying to save humanity from nuclear extinction. It's fucking weird.
I
What?
mean,
Again,
I mean, I mean,
another time. Anyway, that's pretty much it from my interpretation of a movie. Not the most, out there, I understand, but I feel very confident that maybe in the future my mind will change and I will see the movie in a different way, but I think that's the beauty of it. Which,
but let me posit a question first. May I offer you a nice egg in this trying time?
no. Anyway,
Yeah.
this segues into our proper final thoughts and score. Mind you, obviously, because of the high level of subjectivity, this score more than ever is strictly a personal kind of thing. So let's go in order. Who wants to start?
You know what? Since you had the most to say, I feel like you should go first.
Sure, why not? For the record, the score of this will be actually stated alongside the ones of April 1st, considering it's treated as a miscellaneous for now. So when it will come to the ranking, we will say that afterward. But for the time being, I still really enjoy this movie. It's hard to to parse interpret, not in a sense of you need to have this level of IQ, but just in a sense of having the will to go through with it and wanting to have an opinion on it. I can tell, uh, not to sound mean, but I can tell this is the kind of movie that Dweebs probably would not enjoy in the slightest, and he has all the rights to it because, like I said, this is not the average blockbuster movie that is meant to please an audience. So this is there just to be interesting for people who actually seek out this kind of experience, similar to, again, 2001 Space Odyssey.
He'd probably end up enjoying In the Aftermath more.
Yeah, I agree on that. Again, when we're recording this, the movie is stated for a limited theatrical release in different parts of the world, possibly in my country. If it happens, I definitely want to watch this on the big screen because it feels like it was meant to be for that. But otherwise, I really enjoy this. I only briefly touched upon that, but the presentation really is the biggest aspect of this. Not to the point of the dancing bear trope, where the movie feels like it was made just for that, but it is the perfect way this was going to be expressed. You just know that if it was done more recently, the big giant spaceship eye would have been in CGI and possibly would have not look as good as it is. But you can feel all the blood, sweat, and effort that went into every single frame. There are some scenes where the girl's hair flow into it, into the animation, and it's spectacular, complemented obviously by the score, which at times is whimsical, at times it's frightening, at times it's sad, at times, wants to even have a bit of joy into it to represent the situation. But like I said, it's definitely one of the better soundtracks for this kind of movie that I've heard. And it doesn't even uses licensed songs. Similar, 2001 Space Odyssey used a lot of classical music tracks to facilitate things, but in here, no, it's all original score. So I argue it's even a bit better than that on the matter. The story, again, it is quite literally an acquired taste because it asks you an interpretation of it, and it's not an easy one that you have to give. But I argue that's one of the biggest strengths of the movie. I argue that there should be more like this, especially these days, where to paraphrase someone that an opinion on a different place that I heard, a lot of people go to a movie desiring just answer and not questions. Which, to be fair, it's not even an invalid kind of opinion, but I believe just perusing in between a couple of movies similar to this, would be at least interesting for the panorama. And I mean also in terms of genre, because this has the sci-fi fantasy kind of elements. Because a lot of movies that want you to think are still there to this very day. We have, for example, actually an example that recently happened is a movie from Searchlight Picture called Poor Things. It even won a bunch of Oscars recently, and I argue it has a similar vibe to this movie, albeit a more clear type of plot. So technically there is, still a market for these kind of things. As for my very subjective score, I'm giving this one an 8.5 out of 10. I really still enjoyed it. I don't think it's, the biggest, the best movie OVA around for the genre, nor for the type of animation, but it is pretty much up there, and I want to watch it again, particularly on the big screen if it happens. Jova.
Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Like I've mentioned, this feels like a bit of a frustrating movie to analyze and critique because, in one hand, it can feel like if you praise it too much, you're just glazing it for stuff that you kind of have to come into mind and practically play right yourself. On the other hand, if you start to critique it, then you're left to wonder, wait, am I being too harsh? Was it always the message here and there? Okay, first and foremost, I'm going to say the best thing for this movie is definitely the visuals. Now, in regards to the mechanical sun potentially being CGI in like a modern take, I want to be fair. I feel like CGI nowadays is the equivalent to what a stationary thing like that mechanical sun would have been. I don't think CGI is inherently a bad thing. It can actually be used very well. In fact, Disney were like the kings of it back in the 90s of using CGI to give an otherworldly or bigger sense of scope
I
and
can tell you
scale to
that
certain
anime is
things.
catching up still to this very day about the quality of that. One of the better occasions that I've
You know
seen
what that?
in recent times will be Lupin the Third, the first.
The first
Yeah.
that was really good.
And
I will
that
give
is
you.
mostly because it uses a style of CGI more similar to what you would see in, say, Illumination, rather than traditional anime designs.
I also say that Dragon Quest movie, everyone's
Fair
story.
enough. But
The
for
Ooh.
animation. I'm not talking about the quality of the film itself. I'm talking about
the
the animation.
animation.
It's like,
But in comparison,
Oh.
since we're gonna get to it eventually, the CGI remake of the first Pokemon OVA, I'm sorry, it looks awful. It's
hey,
pretty
did you
the
know all
worst.
three of those came out within the same time frame?
Yeesh.
You do have a point, though. One thing anime sadly has not done the best with is CGI, which I do find weird. Granted, maybe that's just due to how practitioners are like. Now, first and foremost, I'm glad anime has been keeping 2D animation well alive, but it really does boggle the mind that they have almost never been able to work well with CGI. Like, I don't get it. Like, is it really that hard? Is it just they've never incorporated the idea whatsoever? But okay,
Also,
I
it
will.
has to do with just like the time and constraints because Japan is really good at CGI. Look at Square Enix, Bandai Namco, etc. I guess it's just like when you're trying to make like a weekly show and you have to use the CGI to cut corners or whatnot. There's a whole it's a whole different discussion to be had.
Uh, that being all said here, again, with what limited budget they had, they made it really work. They do a lot of those animation tricks to mask a low budget, essentially, like slowing down stuff. And you can definitely tell they had to cut corners in some regards, but overall, it still is. Well, okay, the animation and music are gorgeous, but it's hard for me to say if I really do think this movie is good, amazing, maybe a bit lazy, maybe a bit lacking in stuff here and there. I do feel like there are some things I probably would have added. You can have it still be vague, but I feel like it's missing just a few things to truly make it complete. On the other end, though, it's clearly doing something right as well, but I could say somebody could just as easily say this is a bad movie, and that wouldn't be a hot take or anything, just as much as anyone saying this is a good movie. What I will say, though, there was definitely tons of effort poured into these visuals and whatnot. Was it maybe a mistake to leave the story as vague as it was? That's tricky. Like, had like almost any circumstance been a bit different, Oishi's mood, or given more budget, or again the fact that this was almost a comedy, and the only reason Oishi changed it to that was because he was inspired by Yoshitaka Amano's art style to make it more of a fantasy sort of film and whatnot. It's like, again, part of me legit wants to see what that original draft of this being a comedy would have been like. And who knows, maybe it could have done that cool idea of it being a comedy, but then at the end you get hit wham with the reveal that, oh, this is actually all dark and dreary and whatnot. I'll admit, I'm surprised no one has legit done an abridged project of this one because, hey, I guess in the aftermath showed that you could potentially do a pastiche if you really wanted to. And I wouldn't even act like that's being a bastardization of it because, again, at the end of the day, there is no true definition for what this movie is. In terms of it supposedly going against the original vision, even though the original creator himself kind of gives a shrug as to whatever his vision was back in the day, so maybe a little parody could take the helm at that. Who knows? I do think some might find it a little too dreary in one case or whatnot. Others might think it's just the right amount. Again, I will say this. If you're watching this while you're in a downbeat mood, best of luck to you, because this movie doesn't exactly give the most relieving attention, unless you truly do see that ending as a happy ending, in which case, more power to you. So, at the end of the day, I think ultimately I'm gonna give this film a 7. It's the score I would give to a movie that I feel is good, hits that mark, but it's just good. It never quite hits the threshold of amazing per se. I will say in that regard, in hindsight, I would probably lower my Yokai Watch score from like a 7 down to a 6 in that regard, where
Okay.
it's still good, but I'm not sure I'd say it's as good as this in hindsight and whatnot. But yeah, no, Angel's Egg, I give a 7. And I'll say this, I actually would not mind if we get maybe a plot expansion, a sequel, or heck, even a remake of this in the future. Mind you, I know the risks that comes with, but I'll admit, this is something that leaves me wanting more, in a sense. It might be part of why I latched onto In the Aftermath, which in a way can be seen as a plot expansion of this world, again, depending on some theories or whatnot, but again, I do feel like it just needed a little bit more to push it into definitively amazing. But hey, it gets the job done for me, so it gets the 7.
Hiroi.
Shiroi.
I don't have much to say as far as final thoughts go because, it is a very short and I wouldn't say simple movie because there's been a lot to talk about, but yeah, it is fairly straightforward. As in, as far as presentation goes, it is a very beautiful movie both to look at and listen to. And even though I think they are better in moderation, I do like media that causes a lot of discussion like this. I mentioned off the recording before, Yume Nikki
Mhm.
is a similar piece of media. It's just a lot to talk about, even years later. And it's nice no matter what your interpretation is for this kind of thing. I'm going to give this an 8, I think.
Alright
Yeah,
then.
8.
I do agree about the need of moderation in the sense that this sort of movie is a good experiment to have. I do not think every movie should suddenly, though, try and be super vague in the sense of wanting to be called artistic, because then you get stuff like The Cell, essentially, which is, well, I think Nostalgia Critic put it best when he said it's basically the director wanting you to ask him what it means, essentially.
Dej, what about
Dej.
you?
Can we just put Ego's quote from Ratatouille here and just make it a 7? That's it.
Which quote
What it
specifically?
means
No,
to
what
be
he
a
was trying to
critic.
refuse. Yeah.
Yeah.
On a serious note, this is a really difficult movie to give a score
Mm-hmm.
because it's all up to interpretation. I don't want to say that there's not a wrong interpretation for this because trust me, there are some wrong things. But with how the movie wants you to go about it, I feel like this is one of the few things where I feel like, oh, it's open to interpretation and actually does it well instead of, well, we didn't know what to come up with an ending and whatnot, because it usually comes off as a cop-out. But this does bring up interesting conversations, because we all had very different takes on it, of what we thought this movie is and what it represents. It's crazy that I didn't hear about this until recently. And
Same.
And I've been thinking about it since.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I have to give it an 8 if it has left an impression on me and made me realize, oh, this is where a lot of stuff got it from. Oh, this is where it's from. Oh, really? Dark Souls? Okay. But there's no poison swamp, so
Remember, the Poison Swamp is kind of a personal king for Hidetaka Miyazaki regardless of this. According to an interview, he literally mentions he cannot stop himself. Fucking hell.
Why?
Well,
He just makes it everyone else's problem.
One day I'll play a FromSoft game.
Alright, this puts the final score 31.5. Now it's worth noting, audience, that compared to the regular Pokemon, voting, this is a bit all over the place because the previous movies includes votes from people who have been on and off about it. So, even if it's a relatively high score, he still is behind on what we did on April Fool's this year, because that movie involved one or two different peoples, without cheering about it, so Flynn and Jay. So in order, on last place we have Digimon the movie with 9 votes. 9, still too much.
Yeah, it's still too high. Yeah, I'm sorry, still too high.
Then we have Pokemon Live with 24. Then we have this, Angel's Egg, with 31.5. Then we have Yu-Gi-Oh! The Pyramid of Light with 34. And we have, still on top, Yokai Watch the Movie, now with a 35 instead of 36 due to Jova's change. So we'll have to see if something still beats that or not. So, I think that's pretty much it. Sorry audience if you're expecting something more spooky. I'm not fond into jump scares, so nothing flying you through the screen with a loud noise. So you're not getting...
One day, not for this particular podcast, one day Teo and I will do FNAF, the movie.
Hey, look. And let's not forget, there was technically a jump scare in Angel's Egg, so there's your spooky factor.
Anyway, that just leaves us on where to go next.
After that depressing side tour, it's time to get back on track and resolve some unfinished business, specifically of the Mystery Dungeon variety. Join us next time for the brave tales of Piplup, Grovel, and Chimchar in a double episode bonanza, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, Explorers of Time and Darkness, followed by Explorers of the Sky Beyond Time and Darkness.
See you for that.
What a wonderment awaits us.
Stay spooky.